Okay, this how-to is going to cover timing belt changes, and the reason we're looking at an engine block from a Zetec is I wanted to show you something. See those grooves cutting to the top of the pistons there? Yeah, those just happen to be the exact same size as the valves. So when your timing belt breaks and a mechanic tells you, oh, you have valve damage, kick him in the nuts and take your car somewhere else, because there is no valve damage. It cannot happen. There's a relief cut in top of the piston. We have a non-interference engine. I don't know how many times I have to keep telling people this. I tell them this 6 times. They'll go to the mechanic, and the mechanic says that the book lists our engine as interference. So if you believe everything written in the book, I'm going to write a book that says you owe me $6 million, so you better start paying. These are non-interference engines. Get it through your head. Non-interference. So, okay, so there it is. That's why it's not interference. So we have reliefs cut on top of the pistons. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get to work. Just in case anyone's still skeptic about whether or not these engines are non-interference, I'm going to demonstrate something for you. I've got this set at top dead center, the crank set at top dead center. So that means the number 1 and number 4 pistons are at the very top. I'm going to turn this intake cam all the way around. And if this is an interference engine, it's going to screw up all those intake valves on the number 1 and number 4 cylinders. And this car won't run. So, here we go. Rotating. There goes number 4 open, pushing the valves open all the way. Number 4 is closed. There's number 1 being open. Open all the way. Now they're closed. So yeah, if it's an interference engine, this car's not going to start, and that would have been really stupid of me to do that. Now what I want to do here, show you the reason why this top dead center peg bolt does not work on this Zetec engine. It might work on some Zetec engine, but it doesn't work for the one for the ZX2. You can see this is a short block. It's just the block and crank with the pistons and everything in it. You can see where the top dead center peg goes, right here, and it's pretty obvious when this is at top dead center. I'll show you in the top here. That will be when this piston is all the way at the very top of the block. This is the number 1 piston. This is the number 1 piston right here. I'll rotate the crank. You see, gets to top dead center, the very top. Look at that, very top. You can see the keyway here. If it was in the car, it'd be looking like this. You can see the keyway is pointing straight up, 12 o'clock. Alright. Now, I'm going to back this out just 90 degrees, and then I'm going to install the top dead center peg in the front of the block here. Now I backed it up too far. Let me just turn this forward a little bit until it gets to the point where I can get that peg in all the way. Okay. There's the peg. Peg is all the way in, seated in the block. Now, I'm going to turn this until it hits the peg. There, it hit the peg right there. Notice, more light here, that this keyway is not pointing at 12 o'clock. And look around here inside of the block. You can see this is not at the very top. That is not top dead center. That's probably about 10, 15, 20 degrees off. So, if you use a top dead center peg to set your crank at top dead center, you're not going to be able to drive your car very well because this ain't going to run worth a crap. Now watch. I'll take this peg out. So I cannot rotate this crank at all with that peg in. Take the peg out. Watch the piston here. Oh, look. Goes up to the top. I just rotated it forward to 12 o'clock. Now I'm going to back it back up. Put this peg back in. I'm going to try to show you the bottom what this peg touches in here. It really just seats against a little spot on the crank. So and you can see the peg going in there. I'm going to go ahead and screw it in all the way. Try to show you a shot of the place on the crank where it hits. Right there. See if I can get it to turn here. Keep this light on it at the same time. It touches just like that. Gets a flat spot in the crank, just like it's supposed to. It is nowhere near top dead center. So I thought perhaps I was missing where it was supposed to go, and that it's supposed to go against this flat part that's just above that. So, to test that out, I just backed the top dead center peg out, and then rotated this forward till I got to that spot. Still, the peg's not fully inserted, so it kind of diminishes the effectiveness here. The only way to get it to set against that spot is to take the pin out, and then you can't get it even to thread into the hole. There it is, touching the block again. No, not even on top dead center. Look at that gap, how far it is from top dead center. So that is why you do not use the top dead center peg. It's not going to work. Just use a screwdriver, or you can use the keyway pointing at 12 o'clock method. Either way is going to work, especially much better than this top dead center peg. Okay, to get this party started, we are going to have to remove this serpentine belt. Shed a little light on the deal here. Up here, see if I can get this thing to focus on it. There it is. That is the tensioner. There's a 13mm bolt sticking out of it. So, get you I kind of cheated this a little. I got a 13mm box end and a 14mm box end to cheat with. And I'll show you what I mean by cheat. So I'm gonna go back up here, put your it's a lot easier to do without an air conditioner compressor in the way. Put your box end up there. Now alternately you could use a breaker bar. I would recommend not using a ratchet, because as you loosen it and it starts to ratchet, then you'll have a hell of a time trying to get it back to where you had it. So there, we got the 13mm on there. Now in order to loosen tension on this, you pull this towards the back of the car, or like you're going to rotate it clockwise, like you're trying to tighten a bolt. Now that can be difficult to do. I could do it with one hand, but it's much easier to cheat. So I'll show you how to cheat with 2 box-in wrenches. Slide you back under here. Alright. You can see the end of my box in there. And then you see the end of the open end. You take your box end and you slide it. Let me try to switch hands. I know this is turning out crappy, but this is the best I can do by myself here. You put it over the end here like this. And I just angled it in there. Like that there. Oh. Okay. Let's show you outside of the damn thing. Alright. Look at this. There's my box in. This is my 13. It sits in there, setting like this. You take the box part of your other one and you stick it on like that, and then you can turn it. And if you want to go the other way, you just flip this around and you go the other way. It looks a little confusing, but you can't do it wrong. If you try to do it wrong, it's just going to slide back off. It's not going to give you any leverage. Okay, so AC clutch is going to be in the way. Just rotate this shit out of the way, like so. And then pull your belt off. And let it go. Be easy, let it go. This thing's spring back and hit you in the face. Not very pleasant. Now, this belt is no longer an issue. You don't have to take it all the way off unless you're changing it. Save you a little bit of trouble putting it back on later. Alright. Now, next thing you'll want to do is take your crank pulley off. Which on my cars is pretty Ford Racing blue one. Yours may just be a big ugly clunky one. It's an 18 millimeter. I'm going to show you the breaker bar method because I do not have an impact gun. If you're lucky enough to have an impact gun, this would be a good time to use it. If you do not have an impact gun, you're going to have to use the breaker bar method, which basically you use the car starter to break it loose, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you. I need to collect a few parts first. Okay, I got my breaker bar on here. This engine turns, it turns clockwise, same way a clock runs. You got your lower control arm here. What you want to do is brace this against the lower control arm. You just need something to hold it there. What you don't want to happen is it to jump and hit that, because then it can come off or round your bolt off, and then you'll have to buy a new bolt. And if it doesn't loosen it up, well, then you'll have some trouble getting it out. We have to disable the ignition system. You don't want the car to run when you do this. You could end up damaging some things. And show you how to disable the ignition system. Shit. Okay. This is it right here. 3-wire connector. Goes right to your coil pack where your spark plug wires come out. This is all you need to unhook. You got 2 little clips on the side that hold it on. Just use a screwdriver to get them off, to loosen them up and pull it off like that. And there, your ignition system is now disabled. Your car will not run without unplugged. And all you need to do is get in and bump the key. And I'll leave the camera out here to show you how it works. You want to be certain there's no one near this when you bump this key. It could hurt or kill somebody. It's a very serious part of the operation here. When you get in, you turn the key to start, and you just barely tap the start. I mean, for like less than a second. That's all it takes to break this loose. And then you can come out here and take it off real easy by hand. Loctite on mine, so it's in there a little tighter. But you can see now I can take it out by hand. Like so. Actually see some more of the Loctite squeezed out of it there. dried up on the bolt. There it is. That is the breaker bar method. It's just that easy. All you need is a breaker bar, an 18mm socket, something to hold your breaker bar up against the control arm over here. I just use one of my jack stands. Alrighty. Then it should be just this easy to pull this pulley off. Okay, when I left you, I was having an issue because the Loctite that I put on this last time, it squeezed out and got down in here and actually stuck my crank pulley through the nose of the shaft. I couldn't just pull it off. I have heard people report that they couldn't pull theirs off even without the Loctite being an issue, I guess because of corrosion. So I mean, occasionally it does happen when you can't just pull this off. Now, this crank pulley does not have a threaded part on it so that you can use a pulley puller on it. And typically in a space this small you can't really use a jaw puller because there's really no space for it. There's nowhere for the 3 jaws to go because you've only got room for 2 of them. Sometimes you can get those to work. But I'm not going to wait till tomorrow to finish this, so what I've done here is I took my steering wheel puller and I used some hose clamps to hold it onto the pulley. And you see I just turn this and it will pull my pulley off. This is a very handy trick when you can't get a jaw puller in there because steering wheel pullers are smaller. And look at that. Right on in there it goes. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, see the lower timing crank gear right here. This is a dust cover, so a lower cover. This needs to come out of the way. There's some 8mm bolts that hold it on. Let's see if I can get a count on that for you. Like there's one here, one there. And that's it. They are 8mm and you'll both out, so go ahead and remove this lower cover. You see it's pretty messy here in my front. The oil pump seal has been leaking for a while. I'm actually going to be replacing that too. It'll be on the video. Have them out. There one out. Pull this little cover down. I'm going to clean that off before I put it back in. Now, you can see plenty of timing belt down here. It's also mixed in with some oil where it's been leaking. You can clean that out if you've got this problem. In the early cars, the 98s and the really early 99s, they had this lower idler timing pulley. If you don't have this pulley, do not worry, it's not a problem. Not all cars had them, so when you buy your kit, just make sure you get the correct kit because the upper pulley is a different size depending on if you had a lower one or not. Just pay attention before you buy your kit. You know, check this if you have to, if you're uncertain whether or not you had an early model engine or a late model engine. They made the change halfway through the 99 model year. So if you've got a 2000 and up, you don't really have anything to worry about. But if you have anything prior to 2000, you want to make sure you check on that. And we need to remove the upper dust cover. I've already taken my upper cover off. You can probably see here, you can see my belt. There were just 3 bolts. There's one here, one there, and then there's one right down here, right there. That's where it goes. I took this off a couple of weeks ago to inspect my belt. So I've already got mine off, so just take yours off. It's not that hard to get to. You'll also want to get a 17mm socket and take this piece here off. It's just a counterweight. Most people don't even put them back on. Just one bolt here, and then a nut right there. So go ahead and we'll remove that. The reason you have to take this out of the way is it makes it a lot easier to get to this tensioner down here when you go to take that off and you put the belt back on and apply tension. It's a small enough space to work in, no point making it worse. Alright, got that out of the way. So now we need to remove this valve cover. Regain the camera here. One of the hardest parts about removing this valve cover is getting these cables out. The cruise control cable is not so bad. It just pulls right out that side and then pulls out of here. You know, not much to that. It's the throttle cable. It's a real pain in the ass to remove. One of the things about my throttle cables is, long ago I broke these clips that hold the cables onto this bracket, so I zip tied them. To make this a lot easier, just get you a 10mm and take this bolt out, and you just take the whole bracket and everything out of the way. And you don't have to worry about breaking these clips off. Go ahead and get me a 10. One thing I like to do, if possible, in order to keep from losing bolts, is put them back in the original hole. You don't lose them or misplace them or mix up where they're supposed to go. As it's not always practical. Sometimes they'd be in the way. You'll have to leave them out of there, but if you can, leave them in that hole. Now, the really fun part about removing this throttle bracket is that it has 4 clips on it. I can get you a close up here. See, you got some clips here. These have to be pushed in so that it'll go through here. But now there's 2 underneath here. That's the real fun part. What I usually do is just take a screwdriver, stick it underneath, and then pry up on it and pull from the bottom and hold it out with my hand. Hold it there, because if you let go, it'll clip back in, and then you push these top 2 in and you pull the cable out. Bottom out. Push these 2 top ones in. And it's through. What I do is rotate this. It's pretty easy to see how this cable comes out of here. You can see it just wraps around, and then this little end goes down into a little hole down here. Just pull it out. And that's the throttle cables out of the way. And now we have to remove this valve cover. Not all ZX2s have this upper cover. Only the early models had this upper spark plug cover, but everything on here is an 8mm. So, at least that part's easy. Okay. Go ahead and take this spark plug cover off first. Lift your cover, and then unplug your VCT, put the cover out of the way. You just leave that grommet in there, and you don't have to worry about putting it back in later. Just put everything over there out of the way. Pull out all your spark plug wires. These can be really hard to do. Usually stick in there pretty good. Leave that out of the way. Alright, now. Just make this faster, just go ahead and loosen them all up. Typically on parts like this, I like to start on the outside and work my way in, opposite the way that you would torque it down. That way just make sure nothing gets bent up. Looks like I scratched my valve cover there, took a chip out of it. It's not any good. After you get everything loose, it's easy enough to just take these out by hand. It's much quicker. Remember to pull your breather off there, your valve cover breather. Alright, now I've got them all loose. Chances are your valve cover is not just going to come off, especially if it's been a while since you've had it off. So just take a rubber mallet and give it a tap all the way around here. See, I loosened it up. You might have to tap yours a lot more and for longer. And make sure your gasket's good. You want to inspect that to make sure there's no rips or tears in it anywhere. You may be able to reuse it. Okay, now we get the valve cover off. We get the cams exposed before you release the tension on this belt. You need to set it at top dead center. I happen to have myself a little lock tool here. I'm going to sit back here. Now, top dead center on this car is really easy. I'll show you on the crank over here. Go ahead and put your crank bolt back in. To make it easier to turn the engine, at the very least you'll want to take your number one spark plug out. That is the spark plug closest to the timing belt. One way to set top dead center is on here. You'll notice there's a little keyway and a tab that slides through to keep this actually centered where it's supposed to be. If you set that keyway at 12 o'clock, that's top dead center for this engine. So I'll show you this method first, and then I'll show you the screwdriver method afterwards. So we're going to go ahead and turn the engine here. I just put the crank bolt back in. I've already got the number one spark plug out, so it's not too hard to turn this until it hits pressure on the other cylinder. And you see on the gear there it says front. That's right over the top of that keyway. If you're looking through the side, you can see the keyway pretty easy. Can't really see it on camera because of this bolt right there. It's pretty close right there. Let me give this a bump. Get this bolt back out. And you can see right there, this is pointing straight up. That's 12 o'clock. It's at top dead center. One way it's pretty easy to verify your timing right, you go up here and you look at your cams. No, looks like I'm top dead center on the exhaust stroke. Let me give us another rotation. Here on the cams, there's a slot. Get a little more light here. There's a slot there. When this is aligned at top dead center, you'll be able to put this inside the slot. Now, you may have to move it around just a little bit to get it lined up. That is perfectly normal. And your intake cam should always be lined up. Your exhaust cam on this side will almost never be lined up because of the VCT. It never sets at 0, almost never sets at 0 whenever the whenever the car's been shut off and it doesn't have oil pressure. You can see the difference right here. See right here the difference. Put the tool in place here. See how far off that is. Now this one, that's the exhaust cam I was just showing you. Now the intake cam. It's much closer. In fact, I can almost push that in there. It's that much closer. So that is normal. Alright, before I lock this in, and I could push that in if I pushed hard enough. Before I lock this in, I'm going to show you the screwdriver method for finding top dead center. Now keep in mind, there are two top dead centers on this, for the exhaust and for the intake. So if you had it lined up at top dead center and you found that these holes were way down at the bottom and your lobes were facing in on the number one, so you had the lobes here facing out on the intake and facing towards in front of the car on the exhaust, they're facing opposite of each other, that's top dead center. If they were facing into each other, that'd be top dead center on the exhaust stroke. So you'll just be 180 degrees off, you just need to rotate it. Now if your timing belt broke, that wouldn't really matter. It's top dead center on the crank is top dead center no matter what. The computer determines whether or not your cams are in time by using this cam sensor over here. So if you've got that pointed at 12 o'clock, your crank is timed. If you've got this down here pointed at 12 o'clock, it's in time. So don't worry about that. If your belt broke, that's how you time it. Separate. You have to time the intake, or I'm sorry, you have to time the cam separate from the crank. So you just set that at 12 o'clock with the thing pointing straight up and down, or use the screwdriver method that I'm going to show you, and then you'd have to set the cams separate. You have to rotate them into place just like that and slide your lock tool in. Alright, now this particular screwdriver method, you take the number one spark plug out, which I've already done. Alright, if I can get a good angle on this screwdriver here. I get my screwdriver standing up. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate the crank down here. You watch this screwdriver. I'm going to rotate the crank counterclockwise so I can start back over here. Alright, see? Now as we approach top dead center, which I'm coming back clockwise the way the engine normally turns, it comes, you see the screwdriver coming up, and as we go away from top dead center, after we reach the top of the compression stroke, it starts down on the power stroke, the screwdriver starts to go back down. But you'll notice as you're turning this, I'm going to back it back up here. There is a part or place where the screwdriver doesn't move, but the crank does a little bit. You can actually see the cams move, but the crank won't move at all, or the screwdriver won't move. That is top dead center. See right there, see the cams moved, but the crank didn't, or the the piston didn't. See, look at that, little bit of movement. Oh, see there, that's top dead center. How you find it with a screwdriver. Right in the middle where it doesn't move, right there, just like that. If you look down here at your crank, you'll actually see that little keyway is pointing 12 o'clock, just like I showed you before. Alright, so that's the screwdriver method. Now, you need to go ahead and lock these cams in. This cam lock tool I got is very closely machined, so this one actually slides in pretty hard to get in there. Sometimes I end up having to tap it in a little bit with a small hand. Which this time is the case, so go ahead and just give it a little tap. You can see it slid in. Alright, now the exhaust side's going to have to be rotated. It's not quite lined up, see? That's just because of the VCT. That is normal. So don't worry if the exhaust doesn't line up very, that close. Now if it was way off, like if it was sitting straight up and down, that's a problem. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to find the tool that fits this exhaust cam. Okay. So I've got a wrench that fits on the spot on the cam. You see there's a hex spot there. This is a 15/16. So you just use this to move the cam, and then as you're moving it, you'll see that you'll line up over here. Pull this one forward a bit to get it to line up. Okay, with the cam lock tool in place, you can now take tension off of it. Tensioner is right here. There's a 10mm bolt. You just loosen that bolt up. If you're not going to replace the tensioner, which I would recommend you do replace the tensioner, then you don't need to remove this part. Just loosen it up enough so that you can slide it out of this back plate here. I'll show you this back plate. I'm going to paint the back of that light black. I'm washing out my camera image. See, there's the back plate and the tab there. You can see this little part with the notch in it right here. That's the index mark. Well, that's the alignment tab. Then there's a little, can't see it because it's covered up with goop. I'll show you a better picture of it, but this is the index mark where you line this up with, and this is the tab. This whole piece here, you can see it slides into, has a little part that goes into the back plate here. There's a little notch. So that's what they mean when you say you need to put the tab into the back plate. And then you line this up with the index, which when we go to install everything, you'll see how that works. Here's a tensioner that's not installed. You can see this is the tab. You can see there's a little indent mark there. The camera will actually focus on it. There it is. And then this is the alignment. So when you go set the tension, what actually happens is this is where your bolt goes. It holds it in. When you set the tension, you use an Allen wrench to turn this part, and that actually moves when it's installed. It'll actually move this little index mark here. And what you want is that index mark to line up. I'm sorry, this tab to line up with the index mark. So it'll move like that. You want it to line up with this. Okay, once you get that tensioner loose, and if you're having trouble getting it loose with just your 10mm box end, remember to use that cheater method that I showed you earlier on the tensioner for the serpentine belt. And after you get that loose, that little tab that the Allen wrench goes into, just push it down, and that'll take the tension off the belt. There's plenty of slack in it now, so then you just pull the belt off with your fingers. There it is. And if you thought that was hard, you're not going to be real happy when it comes time to put the new one on. So we'll just go down here. I need to take this back out, I suppose. And you just pull it out, like that, and just pick it up to the top. And there's the old belt out. Alright, now if you don't intend to replace the pulleys, you don't have to follow these next few steps. You can skip over most of this and just get to the part where you'll be putting the belt back on. So we're ready to take this lower crank gear off. I did try to remove it before I shot the camera on it to keep the length of the video down, and I noticed I was having trouble pulling it off. And what had happened was a little bit of the coating from this side of my underdrive pulley stuck to the nose of the crank here on this flat surface. So I couldn't really pull it off, so I just took a little scraper and scraped that stuff off and then started pulling on it. If you have to, you can take a screwdriver and get behind it and pry on it to get it out. It's going to be pretty tight. As you see, it's starting to come off. And there it is. See, this is the two-piece, the old two-piece. Have an early engine. And you probably get a good idea why they replaced it. What would happen is this would eat up the back of the belt, because this was allowed to rotate on its own, completely independent of this part, because this wouldn't really stick to that crank. It's so thin it would go behind the key here and just rotate on its own. So what would happen was this would kind of stick a bit, but the belt would still turn against it and it would wear the back of the belt off. You can see there's rubber stuck to this from where the back of the belt was rubbing against it. So that's why they updated it to a single part. When I went to Ford to order this, I did not have to ask for the single piece for my early model engine because they had already did away with the two piece. So it's updated. The new part, the single piece, supersedes the older. They don't even sell these anymore. You can't get them. So you don't have to worry about that part any longer. Alright. This is a mess, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this and then I'll continue with the how-to. Okay, I've got that cleaned up now so you can actually see what's going on in here. After you pull that off, the next part, if you have a lower idler pulley, is to remove the lower idler pulley. This has got to be one of the dumbest places to use a Torx bolt, but Ford used a Torx bolt. The replacement actually uses a hex head, so that's good. The size of this Torx bit is a T50, Torx 50. So you just get your little ratchet, you put it up here. If you need a little extra leverage, you can use a little pipe or something to slide over, or like what I used here. I don't have any pipe short enough to fit under here. I just used a large socket and an extension. And you put it over the edge and it gives you some leverage to get that loose. And then just go ahead and remove that. You want to be real careful. These Torx heads are really easy to round out. So you want to make sure you keep this in there real flat when you're turning it, so that you don't round that out, because you do not want to have to deal with trying to get this bolt out. It's in a bad place to remove a bolt. So we'll go ahead and take this little lower idler out. There we go. That's the old one. This one is a bit noisy. It's definitely in need of replacement. It feels kind of rough. And it's time for this thing to go. You can see the new one, same size, but this one actually uses a nice hex head bolt, a grade 8 hex head. That's real good. I like that they use that replacement. I'm going to put all the pulleys in at the same time, so we're not going to put this in yet. Now that I got that out, clean this mess out up here. All this old shredded timing belt and oil that's collected in here. Get all that stuff out of there. I don't want your new belt picking it up, slinging it everywhere, chunks of it getting caught between the belt and the pulleys and just pitting the belt up. Everything be nice and clean. It also makes it easier to spot oil leaks later if you have any. Like I can see here on the bottom of my oil seal, this is actually the oil pump right here. I can see oil seeping out of it. I'm going to change that in just a bit. Get all this gunk out. Okay, the last pulley is this upper idler pulley. Both the early and late models have this one. On my car, this is a T50 as well, just like the lower one. I don't know what it'll be on the later models. It might actually use a hex head. So you go ahead and you remove that. You gotta be careful, just like you do with the one on the bottom, not to round that out. It's not a part you want to have to try to mess with trying to get a bolt out of if you round it out. So we'll go ahead and get this pulley off, and after I get this off, I'm going to clean up down here. There's old bits of timing belt and oil. You do want to clean everything in this car before you put it back together. That way any new problems will be easier to spot. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that out, and then when we come back, we'll start putting it together. Okay, since I'm already under here, I wanted to replace this oil seal. I got a new one from Ford already. Make sure you order the part you asked for, an oil pump seal, front oil pump seal. They may list it as a crankshaft seal, it'd be the same thing, but it really isn't a crankshaft seal, it's an oil pump seal. And make sure they do not give you cam seals. That's not going to work, they're not the same thing. So I'm just basically using a little pick I've got here to pull it out a little bit at a time, work my way around. Do make seal pullers. It's basically a pick like this, but it's a little bit stronger. It would make it easier to pull it out, but you see it really wasn't all that hard to get out. Just make sure your new one is exactly the same. Same size. Alright, so I'm going to clean that up. Get the paper towel. Careful not to let debris get in there, because that's right directly going into your oil pump. You don't want that mess getting inside your engine. See a little bit of debris there. Be very careful not to scratch this up, or else it won't seal. And you'll just have a leak, probably worse than the one you're trying to fix. So, they do also make seal installers. I don't have one of those either. So, I had to do it the poor man's way. Living on a fixed income sucks, by the way. So, I'm going to put this in. The inside of it wants to bunch up. Which makes it difficult to get this thing to go on straight. I'm trying to use my picks here to help me get this lined up. Almost get the thing in there by hand. Now, since I don't have a seal installer, what I do have is a punch with a very flat tip on it. So I'm just going to be very, very careful not to bend this seal. Just tap it in a little bit at a time, all the way around. You got to watch to make sure that inside of the lip doesn't roll back out, so then it won't seal. That was the reason I was having trouble putting it in. I had to use the pick, that the inside part of the lip wanted to roll back out, so I had to use the pick to push it in. And just very carefully tap it in all the keep my bald head out of the way here. Alright. I had this under here in case oil leaked out. It didn't, so don't worry about that. Alright. Inspect your work. Make sure it's seated flat against the back of it there. Make sure your inner lip didn't roll out. And that looks good. So yeah, front seal's replaced. For some stupid reason, Ford sells these in a pack of 2. You can't buy just one seal. And if I remember correctly, it was like $16. Alright, it was $8.89. So, it's not bad. It's good to replace it at this point instead of waiting for it to fail and you have to take all this stuff back apart to get to it. So there we go, we got that done. And now we can start putting the pulleys back on. Okay, for the VCT delete, going to start by removing this oil plug. Now, oil is going to come out of this. It does use oil pressure to actuate the cam, to retard the cam for the VCT operation. So, I've got some rags, stuff down here to catch it. I don't want this stuff getting all over the place. Oil is very difficult to clean up. Get some rags down there. Using the 15/16 box end. It works a lot better if you have 2 people. You have somebody to help you, but I don't have anyone to help me, so it's a T55 for this plug. So you hold this and then you use to break the plug loose and remove it. There's oil running out of it, so we get the plug out now. And inside there is a bolt that holds the crankshaft on. It is actually a star bolt. It's not a hex head. It's actually in the shape of a star. It's kind of like an inverted Torx bit. You can use, if you have a good set of metric sockets, you can use those. You need like a 12-point socket. Otherwise, you're going to need an internal star socket for that. You don't want to risk rounding that off. It's not a very easy one to take out if you round it off. Okay, I have a 12-point 16mm socket. I don't have a helper, so what I've done is I took my 15/16 box end and I tied it down over here to the radiator core support. So, let's see if this works, or if the rope just breaks and the wrench hits me in the face. Now this bad boy's torqued down to 88 foot-pounds, so it's not going to be any treat to remove. And there we go. That worked. Wow, sometimes I have ideas. Okay, I always have ideas. Sometimes I have good ones. I'm really glad it worked. My wife did not want to come out here and help me with this. Alright, so let's go ahead and I'm just taking this bolt out here. Got my oil soaked rag here. Now should just be able to pull this VCT right off there. VCT gear. Make sure you keep a rag under it because it's still leaking oil. It's not just a VCT delete, it is also a weight reduction. Thing is heavy. Alright. I'm going to undo this mess I got here and I'll start with the VCT delete. Alright, get along with our VCT install here. Kit comes with an O-ring, an adapter, a bolt, and a washer. You're going to put your O-ring on here first. Put our adapter on. You notice one end of the adapter is thicker than the other. So the small end here, the thinner end faces out. You want this big end to go in here so that it fills up where the cam gear used to fill in. See, there's a seal there. Fits in there pretty good. Now, if you do not have cam gear, like an aftermarket gear, you should be able to use stock intake gear. These are pretty easy to find. I mean, they're everywhere. You will, however, have to, even with a aftermarket cam gear, have to drill this center hole out. 9/16 drill bit. You just drill this center hole out. This is only for the exhaust side, not for your intake side. And that way, the new bolt that you buy for this adapter kit will go through there. So if you're going to use a stock intake gear, see, one end of it's machined. This is the end that goes against the cam. So put that on there. Actually, fill it with a slide on. There you go. And now you put your bolt and washer in. And you don't want to get it tight yet because you're going to have to degree this gear into the timing belt. If you just tighten it up, it might not actually line up with the teeth and there'd be too much or too little slack in the middle. It could just cause your belt to come off. It may also not even go on if it's completely out of sync with everything else. So I'm just going to leave this loose for now. Since I don't have a helper, normally you would just put the belt on and then have your helper, you lock your cams in the back, and then you have your helper hold your camshaft still, and then you tighten it up till you get 8 foot-pounds. Since I don't have a helper, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the belt on and the lock tool in. I'm going to get this as tight as I can without tearing the back of the cams out. And then I'm going to go ahead and take the belt back off, and with the cam gear staying in place, I'm going to set this down here like this and tighten this bolt up. Hopefully this won't move. That's the hard part of it, is keeping this part from moving. Okay, so we're going to get along with installing the new pulleys here. I'm going to start with this upper idler. Remember, it is a T50 Torx bit. This one did not come with a new bolt. These get tightened down to 35 foot-pounds. So you just get it snug by hand first. Find our ratchet. If you're lucky enough to have a later model, this is the only idler pulley you have to bother putting in. got my torque wrench here. It's one of the clickers. Makes a nice click sound when you get to the desired torque. On lower torque settings like this, you got to be really careful and listen for it and feel for it, or you'll end up snapping these bolts off, and that's not going to be a very happy day. Make sure I got this going in the right direction. Alright, 35 foot-pounds. And there we go, 35 foot-pounds. And we're going to move on to the lower one. Remember, the lower one comes with a new bolt. It is not a Torx bolt. Okay, this lower one, if it applies to your vehicle, remember the later models don't have it. The bolt that comes with it is a 15 millimeter, and it gets torqued down to 35 foot-pounds. You ran into another little problem here with this new kit. This lower idler, you can see the difference between it and the old one. So the old one has a recessed bolt. It goes down in there. And the problem is, this bolt is attached. It also has a little spacer that goes inside. And what happens is the lip that your lower dust cover slides under won't allow this to set in there because you can't get it aimed straight. It touches the top of the pulley. You can't get the bolt in because it won't thread in straight. And the reason that's not a problem here is because you can put this right against it and then stick the bolt in. So what I had to do was this little spacer here. I just gripped it with some vice grips and then loosened the bolt until the spacer came out. So now this gives me plenty of room to get this in there and then tighten the bolt down. So we'll go ahead and install this pulley. It is a 15 millimeter hex head. I'm not going to be able to do it with that. And it was like, since it's in such an awkward place, I'm not going to be able to get my torque wrench in there. Well, I might. We'll see. Go ahead and try to tighten it up first. Don't quite have the space to do it with the ratchet yet. I'm going to have to use box in until I get that bolt drawn in a bit. And it's going to be a little tough to get in because that spacer is, well, it's not really threaded, but it does have little teeth on it. So you have to tighten it against that spacer and the bolt all at the same time. Not a big deal, it's just going to take a little longer. Let me get this in here now. There we go. Alright. Snug with the ratchet. Just torque it down to 35 foot-pounds with the torque wrench here. So it's 35 foot-pounds. That's my new lower idler. And probably the easiest part is the new timing belt gear. Just line it up with that keyway there. Make sure your key, here's a little key here, make sure it's still down inside the crank, inside the groove on the crank there. This one may take a little bit of encouraging with a rubber mallet. Make sure it's lined up. Like that. So you just get the crank gear, get it lined up, just push it right on. Pretty easy, that's what it is. There we go. Alright. Nice new one-piece deal. Alright. Now we get to install the belt and idler, or I'm sorry, tension pulley. Alright, now we're at the part where we put the belt back in. Just take your belt here, and when you took it out, it just came up to the center. See, right here, well, maybe not. Right, try to get some more light. There it is. The belt's going to go down between here. Your belt will come out the bottom, and you wrap it around the crank gear. You got to make sure this is set at top dead center before you put it on the cams. The car's not going to run very good. Okay. And when you install your tensioner pulley, you don't want to tighten it down all the way. You don't want to put the tab in the back plate. That'll make it a lot easier to put this belt back in. Just put the bolt in. You can see here, you can just put the bolt in and get it finger tight. Make sure the tab is not in the back plate. You won't put that in until you get the belt all the way on. And that way it gives you more slack to work with. It's not as hard to do. And just get it on the crank down there. Go ahead and wrap it around your gears. You'll notice my exhaust gear is loose. I'm also doing a VCT delete how-to at the same time. So your gear shouldn't be loose like this unless you're doing the VCT delete. Alright, so slide this around your pulleys here. You gotta keep checking the bottom one to make sure that it's all the teeth are engaged. You gotta be real careful not to pull on it too hard, or else you'll pull it off top dead center. So, got that on. Resist the urge to pry it on. You might have to cuss it a little bit, but you can see here, it'll slide on. On all the pulleys here, push it back about 1/16 of an inch there. It'll ride wherever it wants to ride once you start the car. Make sure it's still engaged in the teeth on the bottom, and that you're still at top dead center. Okay, now this has to be, when you do the VCT delete, when you put the new cam gear on, this has to be tightened down to 88 foot-pounds. My lovely assistant here is going to help me, since I could do this by myself, but well, it's much easier with two people because this gear is going to move as you tighten it down, and it might not stay where you put it. So using the 15/16 opening wrench, I'm going to hold the cam still, and she's going to try to torque it down to 88 foot-pounds. Remember, you're going to listen for it to click. Not to jerk. And that's 88 foot-pounds. See, I left the cam lock tool. I left the cam lock tool. You probably look like a blur. I left the cam lock tool in so that I can make sure the teeth on this would be set at top dead center. But that's why I had to hold it. Otherwise, it would eat the back end of it would break the back of the cams off if you weren't holding it. These really won't take much torture at all. Okay. Talk about a difficult shot to set up. Alright. You see, now that I got the belt on, I can go ahead and slide this tab here into the back plate. Okay. The tab in the back plate, you can use a 6mm Allen wrench to line the tab up here. Where did my tab go? Line that little tab up with the index mark. See, hopefully you can see as I pull this index or this little tab up with the Allen key, you can see that index mark starts to line up. Now, I just wanted to demonstrate that for you. You want to get this bolt here kind of snug. It's probably supposed to be tightened down to about 35 foot-pounds like the others, but you're not going to be able to get a torque wrench in here, so it's going to have to be your best guess. It's going to be snug. But you don't want to overly do it, because then you'll just end up with way too much tension. There you go. You can see how that lined up with the index mark there. Now, when you probably want to look at this after you run the engine, it's not going to line up. That's fine. As long as it lines up, whenever you initially apply the tension to it, that's all you need. So you go ahead and you gotta hold that there with the Allen wrench, and then you tighten up your 10mm bolt. I had to reuse this bolt. The kit did not come with a new one. Nothing wrong with that, as long as the bolt's in good condition. Be very careful not to over tighten this or it will break. There's a lot of people have had them break. A lot of people have had them come out because the previous owner took it to a shop and they broke it and just put a helicoil in there, and they didn't do a very good job of that. So go ahead and get this good and snug there, while holding your tension on it with the Allen wrench. Alright, my index mark is still lined up. There we go. Should be pretty close. 35 foot-pounds. And you're pretty much done with the really hard part. You remove your lock tool. Make sure you plug your ignition coil back in if you ended up using the breaker bar method to get the crank pulley off. And you might want to rotate it a couple of times with the wrench on the crank to make sure that everything's still lined up at top dead center. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. It's a good time to keep the screwdriver up here so that you can watch to make sure the crank is lined up at top dead center at the same time your cams are lined up. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate this a couple of times to make sure that everything stays at top dead center and you don't have anything binding up. You got to put your bolt back in the bottom. Take it easy with this part. You don't want to break anything here, so just want to watch the center of your belt too to make sure it doesn't do any jumping. That means improper tension. Or if you did the VCT delete, that would mean that you need to re-index your gear. Okay, that's top dead center for the exhaust stroke. Those are facing each other. Alright, let's go back around. Okay, find that sweet spot. Alright, that looks like it there. And then see if the hot tool will go back into the cams. My lock tool always been so hard. Really close in the intake cam. It's always been really hard to get into the intake cam. Usually end up having to tap it in. This just fine in the exhaust cam. There we go. Really close on the intake. It goes in, but I just had to move it a little bit. There's really nothing you can do about that. This is as good as it gets. Alrighty. Now we just start putting everything back together. So, put your crank pulley back on. There's really not any way you're going to be able to get that torque down to the 80 or so foot-pounds required out of it, unless you have an impact wrench. But I don't have one, so that's why I use a little bit of Loctite. But don't make the mistake I made the first time, put too much Loctite on it. Just a little bitty drop on the very end of the threads would be just fine. So you go ahead and reassemble everything and start your car. You're ready to go. Make sure you torque your valve cover down to the proper sequence and in the proper order. There's a picture of that. It'll be on here. And everything should be good to go. And remember, my car shouldn't start because I turned that intake cam all over the place when I had the crankshaft, the belt off. And then of course I was rotating the crank around to find top dead center again with the cams locked in place. So my car shouldn't run. We'll see. Okay, go ahead and install your lower timing cover. Or, I'm sorry, your lower timing belt dust cover. Put your crank pulley on. Okay, after you get your lower dust cover back on, put your crank pulley in. This bolt's supposed to be tightened down 81 to 89 foot-pounds. But there's really no way to hold that still and tighten it down. So what I do, I just put a couple little drops on the very tip of the bolt with some medium strength Loctite. Thread the bolt in as far as I can get it by hand. And if you got an impact gun, just whoop on it a little bit. That'd be plenty of tight. You might not even need the Loctite, but I like to put that in there just to make certain. So then I get it tight as I can by hand. You see it's just going to turn. So I use my Hillbilly Impact, which is just basically a big rubber mallet, and the breaker bar, and I hit the very end of the breaker bar to tighten it up. The Sutton shock here, tighten it up a bit, and the Loctite will keep it there. Now you put your valve cover on and tighten it down between 50 to 74 inch-pounds. Don't mistake that for foot-pounds. You'll snap these valve cover bolts off. It's inch-pounds. It's really about as snug as you could get it with a screwdriver. It's not very tight. You do need to tighten it in a certain sequence. You look at this valve cover here. The first one you'll tighten down. This one in the middle. The second one's the one right across from that. The third one you're going to tighten down. It's right here. Fourth one you tighten down. It's right here. So you see, basically you're working from the center out. Now the fifth one you tighten down. It's the one in the center here, on the closest to the front of the car. And the sixth one's right across from that. And then your seventh one is down here, front end of the car, in the corner. And then eighth one is right across from that. And your ninth one is down here in the lower corner, close to the timing belt. And then the last one you tighten is this one. So go ahead and put this on here. Check to make sure your gasket didn't fold up anywhere. Okay. These bolts are 8 millimeters. Go ahead and run them all down finger tight first. Make sure they all catch a good thread. And do that in the proper sequence. Now this is the point where you tighten them down to the torque value, and you have to make sure you do it in the proper order. Alright, they're all tight now. Make sure you put your #1 spark plug back in. Reinstall your breather tube. And put your throttle cable bracket back on. This throttle cable bolt is a 10 millimeter. Plug your spark plug wires in. Now you should get a nice solid click out of these. You might even be able to hear it on the camera. You should certainly feel it when you push down. Otherwise, they're not making good connection. They'll sit all the way in there, but they won't be making good connection unless you feel that click. be pretty obvious. If you don't get a good connection, it'll won't run very well. And if you have one, install your spark plug cover, and make sure you plug in your VCT solenoid. These are 8mm bolts that hold this on. Keep losing mine, so I'm at 4. Get torqued down. I don't remember the exact value. It's a bit less than the valve cover bolts. I'm not holding anything down with this little plastic cover, so just get them snug. You don't have to get them very tight. You can install your throttle cable. Let's put this in first. It's usually easier. Make sure it clips in on all 4 pieces there. My fingers are a bit oily, so the cable keeps slipping out of my hand, but it wraps around. There you go. And if you have cruise control, the cruise control cable back in, just push it into the bracket, and then it clips onto the end of the throttle cam there. Alright. And now that we get that all done, we can put the upper cover back on. This one's a little difficult to get on. Can't be easy, right? But it does go on there. You just have to be careful when you slide it on. This little gasket here likes to fold up and come out. Just be patient with it, and it'll go back in. Now, I just did that for demonstration. I'm going to leave mine off since I just put the new belt on so that I can watch the belt when I start it. Make sure it's not going to walk off or bind up or anything. I'll set this stuff aside. Also, if you want to reinstall this counterweight after you put your cover on, stick your counterweight back on there and tighten it back down. I'm going to leave mine off. You remember this engine was interference. It shouldn't start because I had the cams locked in and I rotated that crank around twice. So if this is an interference engine, it certainly would have just messed those valves up on the number 1 and number 4. So I'm sorry, the number 2 and number 3 cylinders, because they were open. And let's find out. So the startup. Ooh, the drama, the mystery, will it start? Oh, look, it started. So next time a mechanic tries to tell you that this is an interference engine, kick him in the nuts and show him this video and kick him in the nuts again.